Many of us have woken up to the fake money and the banking scam, fake health and the pharmaceutical scam, fake government, fake climate crisis. Never mind COVID, the list goes on. But most people have not yet found what could be the most insidious and deadly campaign ever perpetrated against humanity. I'm talking about the food conspiracy. How our food is actually being used as a weapon to destroy humanity's health, make us sick, addicted, weak, dependent, and subservient. If this is news to you, listen up, because you are missing vital information that could literally save your life. The modern world is witnessing a very real pandemic, and it's one of chronic disease. In other words, they're killing us slowly. Everyone's health is collapsing, and when they're pointed out, the causes are obvious. Yet almost nothing is being said, and even less is being done. It's up to you. Only you can take back responsibility and control. Exactly how you can do this is explained in the presentation, The Food Conspiracy, which is linked in the description. It'll reveal why and how this war is being waged against us, and show you exactly how you can take back control over your family and your health. Prepare to be surprised, shocked, and to have many of your beliefs challenged. Click the link in the description right now, watch the video, and find out what you can do today. Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Today my guest is Dr. Tom Zinser. First, a couple of announcements. Download your copy of the Forbidden documentary right now. Just click the link in the description. It's only $5. You can also get it from our website. And if you're a Rokfin subscriber, you can watch it on Rokfin pay-per-view. You can also now get Forbidden Knowledge News live 5 days a week on Rokfin, Rumble, and our website. That website, again, is forbiddenknowledge.news. It's also the home of the Forbidden Knowledge Network. That's where we feature some of your favorite podcasts. And you can always get every new episode of Forbidden Knowledge News on Rokfin, Rumble, and all podcast platforms. Sign up on Rokfin. This is where you get our premium content. You also get all the premium content from every amazing creator on Rokfin. Just go to rokfin.com/FKN Plus or use the link right in the description. Today I want to welcome back to the show Dr. Tom Zinser. He is a hypnotherapist, spiritual counselor, and author of the Soul-Centered Healing Essay Series. He's currently retired from private practice. He was a clinical psychologist specializing in hypnosis and the treatment of dissociative disorders. Dr. Zinser, welcome back. How you doing?
I'm doing just fine, Chris, and thanks again for having me. Ready to get into some questions of the universe, I guess.
Oh, yes, definitely looking forward to it. I really enjoyed our last discussion, and it was quite a while ago. So today I want to revisit some of your sessions with Catherine and Jared and further explore some of the incredible insights and information gained from those sessions, such as new understandings of dissociative identity disorder, as well as how the spirit realms intersect our reality and the powers of consciousness and its connections to the spiritual and even possibly what we might consider non-human intelligences. But we'll get to that if we can. So first, it's been a little while. Remind the audience just a little bit about yourself and your work and what brought you down your path.
Well, I was a psychologist in the late 1970s, and I did hypnotherapy, worked with clients who had been traumatized and basically what we call dissociative disorders, where parts of themselves kind of are split off with the trauma and kind of hold it inside. And in 1987, a woman who worked in our office, the bookkeeper, Catherine, wanted to know if I would like to have a session with a spirit guide named Jared. And I'd never had anything like that. I agreed to it. And of course, with Jared in the first session, I basically asked questions about my work. And Jared began to tell me information that of what I would only say he perceived as psychic levels, as spirit levels, and he could read my client's soul in the present. This is what I found out over a few months. So Jared and Catherine and I agreed to form a collaboration so that in my work with clients, I would involve Jared and his information on a weekly basis. So I went back and forth between Jared and my clients for 15 years. And in that time, a kind of picture of the inner world and of the spirit world began to kind of come into focus. So for all those years, it basically was an exploration, an investigation of healing at the psychic, spiritual levels using hypnosis, communicating with parts of the self, communicating with entities that were from outside the self. And the healing work really was always aimed at clearing blocks and bringing in the light, love, energy of one's own soul and of the divine. That was basically the ultimate goal all the time. Bring in more light, release pain, become clear, confident, centered with yourself. So in a nutshell, that's...
Excellent. Yes. Now, as far as your understanding of Jared and who or what this entity was, did you find out that this was at one time a human that was incarnated physically on this earth?
Very early, Jared told me that he was a spirit guide. He was a soul, just as we are all souls. That he was created as a guide from the beginning and had never lived an incarnated life. But he did let me know that there were a couple times he manifested a physical body just in order to have the experience. That's not living a lifetime, though. It was a very temporary state.
Right.
From the beginning, he has been a guide.
Now, is it always some sort of significant trauma that would trigger something like this dissociative disorders?
Well, I would say first, dissociative disorders have to be understood in terms of a spectrum. And the term that I would use most frequently is subpersonalities. Now, sometimes they're called ego states, which I first learned about. That's the term I used. And in those clients suffering from dissociative identity disorder, they have been called alter personalities. But I'm going to use the term subpersonality for all of those, but there are different degrees. And what happens is, this is most often children and adolescents, because their ego identity, their ego defenses are not as well formed yet. But especially in childhood and adolescence, when there is trauma, and in this case, it means when the conscious self can no longer tolerate what is happening. Basically, they're having to just get out. There is a part of the mind I call the protective part of the mind I think we may have talked about it last time, but we all have this protective part. And here's one of the difficult things with our present day science and psychology. This protective part is an active consciousness, but it is separate from our conscious self. And this protective part is always, always aware. And its first order of business is to protect the body, survival. But I look at the protective part as a kind of evolved survival instinct in the sense that it has developed psychological, emotional layers. So it will, whenever the self is under threat and overwhelmed, the protective part can trigger the creation of a subpersonality to take over in that moment and do whatever it can do to get the self safe. Once that's happened and this conscious self can come back to awareness, it's safe to come back, that subpersonality will move to the unconscious level. And it needs to be understood that this is a conscious psychic being. It has a level of intelligence, it can communicate, and it is still alive within the reality in which it was created. So it's a very slim reality, but it is a conscious being. And in soul-centered healing, the first objective is to identify subpersonalities that have been operating at an unconscious level and getting triggered in the person's life. And often a person doesn't know why this is happening, why they're feeling what they're feeling, or why they're thinking these things, or why they're reacting. It is often because a subpersonality has been triggered and is reacting just like it did when it was first created. So that's kind of a sketch. We all have subpersonalities created. As children,
now,
go ahead.
As far as this protective part of the mind, and even what you would consider spirit guides, is this something that we are initially incarnated into this reality connected with?
As Jared explained to me, the protective part is a part of the physical body. When the body dies, that protective part will also dissolve. And I should bring in here, I'm sure we talked about this, and that is the higher self. And the higher self is that part of us that is part of the soul, as Jared describes it. It's as if the soul projects a piece of itself into the person's present incarnation. So when we are born, that higher self has been created and brought forward from the soul. So that is a part of the self which is also a separate consciousness. It's a high-level consciousness. It has a great deal of information. It is a constant connection to our own soul light. And it also has the ability to move into the soul to get information that may be needed in our healing work. So you have the protective part, it's part of the body. The higher self is not part of the body. The higher self will continue on with the soul, with ourselves, when we leave the body. So that's two different kinds of consciousness operating along with our conscious self. And then you have the subpersonalities. They too, as I said, are conscious and aware, but living in a very narrow reality until we make the contact. I had an elderly client once who, I forget the exact issue we were dealing with, but what I found with her in the hypnosis were a group of subpersonalities who shared with me that they were camping. They were in a camp out in the forest, had their own little camp, and again, this is because their consciousness created this. This is where they were living. And it's as if my voice broke into that world of their campground. And that's when I began to talk to them. And they weren't quite sure who I was when I first announced myself. So in the healing work, we're entering into these realities with the subpersonalities. What we want to do is let them know that they can have light, love, energy for themselves right now, right as I'm talking to them. And if they agree to it, the higher self can bring them that light, love, energy right now. And once they receive that, they receive a greater understanding about healing. They feel this love and light energy, and they let me know, and I would say this is 90.8% of the time, they do not want to be without that light, love, energy once they have felt it. So when they have, it's much easier for them to share that trauma that they're carrying inside. And when they share that to the conscious mind, it's as if that pain energy has now gone full circuit, and that subpersonality can release that pain, fear, hurt, anger, whatever it's carrying, and it can move to a place of integration within the self. So that's a real thumbnail sketch.
Yeah. Now, to what extent do you believe that these subpersonalities are conscious and even aware of themselves? Do you believe that they believe they're living a full human incarnation here, or are they aware that they are in a way subpersonalities? How does that work?
Most of them are not aware. They're not aware of themselves as individuals. They're not aware of present reality. It's as if they are living in an eternal present. If a child, for example, a parent got extremely angry at them and really kind of emotionally attacked them, they may be overwhelmed and a personality created to take over right then. That subpersonality is going to live in that moment. That's what its world is. And in the future, if somebody gets really angry at the person, that subpersonality may be triggered because it has felt that. It has gone through that. And so now it's being triggered and it's reacting again. It is not aware. It does not live a lifetime. It's living then in that kind of present moment to itself until it is able to share and release and move out of that. It can move out of that moment, but they're not creative. As Jared has said to me, these are not creative beings. They also do not realize they have choice. Again, living in this eternal present, they're not thinking and active and living like we think about. So they don't understand that they have choice. They do not understand the power of their own consciousness. But when we make contact with them and they receive light, they begin to, in a sense, awaken more to who they are and the choices they have to receive light, to be released, to integrate into a comfortable, light-filled place within the self. They don't know that until we come and let them know.
Now, is it possible that a subpersonality can be triggered by illicit substance use, drugs, something other than what you would consider traditional trauma, or even dark occult practices?
Well, dark occult practices, you're going to be talking about trauma.
Okay.
As far as others, what I would say, Chris, is we can't define trauma from the outside. trauma is the experience of the individual. You can have a kid trip on the steps, kind of hit their head, but somehow be so terrified about what happened, it can create a subpersonality. Another kid trips, hits the step, and it's all right. He's up, and for one, it's a trauma. For another, it isn't. So when we talk about somebody taking drugs, for example, talking an older person, 18, 20 years old, if they take a psychedelic, for example, a mind-altering drug, it can create an experience that is so confusing, so frightening, upsetting to the person that it is traumatic. And there may be a dissociation, and another part will take over at that moment, again, doing what it can to resolve the problem. To answer your question more technically, people can, I believe, create these subpersonalities intentionally with their own energy and consciousness. But that's kind of getting into a different area. It's an important one. In the Eastern tradition, they have entities called tulpas. These tulpas are created by the person's consciousness, and they are believed to be, and I think it's true, they are separate psychic beings. So it's not like this is new.
Something you would also call an egregore?
That's a good question.
Because I've heard that these are also similar to tulpas, or probably the same things. If we give something enough thought and energy or fear, that it can manifest in our consciousness as something that is very real for us and affects our lives in physical ways at times. Oh, hold on, Doctor. I can't hear you. I don't know what happened there.
I'm registering here that the mic's on. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now. Okay.
Okay. Chris, I would have to look at this more closely. An egregore, as far as I understand, is like a collective energy. Okay. Where a group of people in their thought energy and collective energy form this kind of almost a separate, limited, but a consciousness and a kind of collective energy. I haven't read egregore applied to just an individual creation, an individual's creation.
Okay.
But certainly there are things like thought forms. And a person can create thought forms that continue to affect them, but thought forms can also be injected from the outside. And a person may, as they're growing up, there may be certain thought forms that kind of take root and may continue to affect them. Now, this would be something also that can be discovered in the hypnosis. If we ask about a particular issue and it involves a thought form, higher self can usually identify that it is a thought form that's active here.
Now, do you also run into things like spirit attachments, and how can you tell the difference if there is one?
I run into spirit attachment all the time. And I would say it this way. There are spirit attachments and there are spirit intrusions. And spirit attachment is, in a sense, they don't enter into your energy, but they interact with you and they can stay attached and interact at that psychic level. There are other entities who actually enter into your soul level energy. And in that sense, they are operating from within your energy. When you're working with someone, and there is a spirit or spirits, plural, involved, higher self is the one. For example, somebody says they have this problem, they got these voices, they're constantly berating them, and they don't know how to stop these voices. I would ask higher self, please look inside and find the source of these voices for Joe Smith. And first finger, higher self, let me know when you have found that cause. Higher self lets me know it has found that. I will bring that one forward and communicate with them. And I will ask them, do you know that you are part of this self and soul that I'm working with? And they may say no. I'll ask higher self whether this one I'm talking to is separate from the self soul, from the client. So there is a process of identifying who we're working with. Is this a part of my client? And it's one of these subpersonalities that affects them? Or has there been outside interference going on here? Or both? Because these subpersonalities are one of the primary vulnerabilities to outside interference. These spirits will usually attach or enter a person at the point of a subpersonality that the spirit, it can be aware of an issue. Now, one example I use often is Jared I was working with a man, probably in his 50s, who identified a 12-year-old angry subpersonality, and he was blocked from the light, couldn't receive the light. I finally would ask Jared about it, and Jared said the problem was that this 12-year-old was carrying a pocket knife in his pocket, and that as long as he had that pocket knife, he was going to be blocking the light, because the pocket knife had been given to him by an outside dark spirit. And when this boy accepted the knife with the idea that it would be protection for him, but he accepted that knife, he was bringing in that spirit's energy device. And as long as he held that device in his pocket, that spirit had an access to him, and through him, maybe to other levels of the self. So these kind of devices are typical, but they also can, these spirits can access a person, especially through the subpersonality's emotion. You have a subpersonality who is enraged, angry, maybe had been abused, and when it was created, it was enraged. An outside spirit may use that rage to enter, to use it as a doorway, and enter into that, kind of by connecting to that anger energy. So we got both going on, parts of the self, entities that are separate from the self, and outside entities are a whole range of different kind of beings. So.
Now, I want to get to that in a minute, but first you were saying that your mediator for even the subpersonalities as well as non-human entities is always the higher self. You are always asking the higher self to mediate and identify these things?
I would say most of the time. I may be working with a subpersonality who's quite frightened, and that subpersonality will tell me that there's somebody else in the room with him. And so I'll ask higher self to take a look, see if higher self can find that one, so I get information. So I would say most of the time, either I'm using higher self to identify who and what I'm dealing with, or I identify somebody and I'm asking higher self to confirm for me what I'm learning. So one way or the other, higher self is usually right there.
Now, could you possibly give some examples of instances where you were dealing with something that was not necessarily a part of that human consciousness, but had expressed itself in a way that you were able to find out that it was indeed a non-human, and maybe some examples of some of experiences like that?
Well, first I'll tell you the kinds of entities run the gamut. Mm-hmm. Most of what I would talk about are separate souls, and they can be either spirits, maybe off-planet beings, dimensional beings, created entities. So you've got a lot that you have to identify. But I worked with a woman once where over a number of sessions, in her dreams, but also in my work with her, we had this character continue to show up. Excuse me. She would describe him and how he was dressed, and basically came to call him the gray man. And this gray man was showing up so often that I had first thought he was a subpersonality. And finally, he showed up so often in different situations that I found out, working with higher self, that he was a spirit. And he was a spirit who had not gone to the light when his body died. Mm-hmm. And he was a spirit who also, his soul, had shared a number of lifetimes with my client. And so he recognized her soul, and he, in a sense, formed this ongoing interaction with her. And so he became known to us as the gray man, and I had to work with him to finally help him to receive light, help him know it would be safe for him to go to the light now. And he finally did. There's spirits like that you may find when you're working with subpersonalities. They continue to block your work. So when you identify them, it's not like you give them a name. They often, many take human form because they've had a human experience. Some do not take human form. Some can take an animal form or creature form. Some may be only a voice that the subpersonality hears. So I don't get kind of these detailed descriptions. But once I communicate, once I can establish communication with them, what I developed are the protocols on how to communicate to these beings to make it safe for them to receive the light, to look inside and reconnect with their own light, if they're a soul, and this whole issue that they can go to the light if they choose to. And if they have scares about that, some of them do, they're often angry at God or afraid of judgment, or they're too ashamed, I can let them know that there are high-level guides in the light who are willing to step forward and communicate with them. More information and knowledge about what's happened to them and about the place of light waiting for them. And once we get to that point, they're usually ready to go. Sometimes they leave and go to the light before I'm even done with my spiel. So
now this objective to go towards the light, this is across the board. It works with any type of entity that you come across?
It doesn't. It works with spirit beings. Mm-hmm. Any spirit being. There are spirits that try to stay close to Earth because they're afraid when they die, so the spirit doesn't go to the light. There are other spirits who don't want to go to the light, and they're kind of sophisticated. They can travel around. And then there are dark spirits. So again, there's all kinds that might come into play. Then you have off-planet beings, and you have dimensional beings who, it's difficult with our language, but I consider them to be incarnate. They are not ready to go to the light and dwell there like a spirit, and in a sense, maybe prepare for reincarnation. But when I'm communicating with these beings, they can receive contact from the light and from guides. And so I do the same thing with them, kind of negotiate contact with the higher level guides so that they understand the situation. And when they understand the situation, that they are intruding on my client, that they're interfering, that this is not something my client's soul is in agreement with at this point. Once they understand that, they are usually and voluntarily will leave my client. Now, I've had a few clients who did not want to break that contact and wanted to continue carrying on those relationships, in which case that's what we do. It's the client's choice. Most of the time, I would say it's going to be an interference, but there are positive situations.
Now, I'd love to get some examples of the different types of entities, like you said, extraterrestrial or dimensional, that you may have encountered.
Chris, when I started, and I, through Jared, learned about a spirit and worked with the spirit, and Jared, again, was teaching me how to deal with them. In the first, I would say, 6-9 months, when I made contact with some separate entities, my idea was I am going to be able to categorize these entities. So I might be able to come up with, there are 3 extraterrestrial species, there are these kind of dimensional beings, and that's within a few years, it was clear to me that there were more species and more beings than I was ever going to categorize.
Wow.
The second part of this is, when I worked with these beings in the hypnosis with the clients, the goal was healing and treatment. It was not exploration and investigation. Mm-hmm. So when I dealt with these beings, there were not questions on my part about who are you, how do you live, what's your existence like, how many of you are there, the whole bit.
Yeah.
That was not the purpose of my work. So there were too many to categorize, and my concern was that my client be cleared of this interference. So my working with these beings was almost always a kind of one-to-one situation with the client and exactly who the interruption or interference was. Mm-hmm. The next client may be a whole different story.
Now, were you ever able to decipher the purposes that interdimensional or extraterrestrial beings were attaching or inhabiting the soul of a human?
There were a number of agendas going on depending on who the beings were. What I will call off-planet beings, or we would call extraterrestrial, and that does not take in all the territory. There were agendas like observing humans over long periods of time through families and collecting data, learning about humans. There were other beings who were carrying out hybrid experiments where you hear of humans being abducted, and they will describe what seems to be them, that they were on like these beings will follow a soul through lifetimes. And For example, a client may have had an experience with one of these beings in a lifetime 300 years ago. When this person, my client, is approached by these beings, that experience that they hold within their soul, my client, that's the part that starts to respond to these beings. And I probably should bring in here, these entities, any of them, they are not free just to intrude and invade the soul. They have to have some kind of permission. And the issue is there are what Jared called backdoor permissions. So for the example I gave about the spirit who was going to help this little 12-year-old by giving him a knife, but also then gaining access, this is an agreement. That child took the knife. Didn't know he was making an agreement, didn't know who this being was, what it was about, but he accepted the knife. And the spirit will take that as an agreement and then instigate this connection. So this kind of permission is necessary. So when I talk about these, say an extraterrestrial group making contact with a client, and they will connect with that part that's 300 years ago in the soul, that was a permission, and now they're contacting it in the client's present life, and that permission still stands. So when we work with a person in healing and we terminate these connections within the self-soul of the client, we also work with higher self to identify any accesses that these beings have used to make that contact. So whether it's in this lifetime, whether it's a past lifetime, higher self will help find the access, so we not only help remove these beings, we also close any doors that have been left open.
Have you experienced any instances where it was a purely of a benevolent nature that these spirits were attached or part of a subpersonality?
I would say I've run into a number of spirits, even extraterrestrial, who were well-intentioned. They did not mean harm. They were either about their agenda, or there were some lower level kind of spirits who were trying to help a client. So there is that. But in those cases as well, those beings usually do not understand the effect their connection or inhabitation with my client is having on the client. So when I'm communicating with them, I help them make it clear to them that they are creating difficulties.
So you would say even the most benevolent type of spirit attachment or entity that is attached to your soul in some way could be a hindrance or a problem.
Very early on, Chris, Jared said to me that these connections by extraterrestrials, by dimensional beings, he did not see them as a positive development. And he was not saying they were evil, not all of them, some are, but and that they were meaning harm. But Jared said his view was that they were an interruption or an interference with my client's soul blueprint for this lifetime. Now, I would qualify it by saying there are people who before incarnation have made agreements to have these experiences once they incarnate, and often it may be to help resolve issues that the soul has been carrying about these contacts or these connections. So I don't want to make this kind of a, absolute statement. There can be plans to have these kind of engagements in one's lifetime. But usually, Jared was saying, they're not positive. They can throw the person, in a sense, off track.
Now, have you had... Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to ask if you have had any instances where you absolutely could not convince the subpersonality or even spirit to vacate or leave the person, where it just flat out refused.
Okay. First of all, subpersonality, we do not want that to leave the person.
Okay.
It will integrate with that conscious self. And, we've not talked about past life subpersonalities yet. But these, to your question, yes, I've had a number of very dark spirits who refused and continue to refuse. Were wanting to carry this fight on right down to the end, that they were not going to leave. And in that case, I will usually, you make the contact with the higher self, which is the light. I will make contact with the client's higher level guides who are from the light. And I know that my client is the one with the final choice here. That is a tremendous power to be aware of. So in that sense, I know these beings are going to leave one way or another once my client at that deep level makes the choice for them to be gone. In this case, it might be finding a past life subpersonality who's been kind of hoodwinked into this. I will help them to understand what's happened and get them to the point where they make the choice that they want to end this connection. So whenever there's one of these, or more than one, a group that are refusing to vacate, we will press it to find accesses, and we will press it to find out who's given the permission, usually unconsciously, and have them make a new choice. Once those accesses are closed, once the ones involved have chosen that they want these beings gone, these beings will be removed if they do not leave. And I have had a number of situations where we have had to call in guides to come right down to the line, kind of between light and dark, and force these beings out. That's not happened too often. We don't usually get to that point, but it has happened. These beings are usually under the direction of higher ups. There is usually a hierarchy, and that creates complications. It's a little more work to get to that point where the choice can be made to cut. But that's what we work for, to get to that point.
You're saying some of these entities are working for higher level entities when inhabiting or infecting a person's subpersonalities.
There's no question in my mind. That's these souls in darkness, as Jared has said, these spirits, dark spirits, are souls. And as souls, they still carry the light inside them. But this light has become so covered over in terms of the experience that they've had to finally move into darkness. They do not even remember their own light. So in that sense, I know from the beginning that if I can convince them to reconnect, even touch their own inner light, they will remember who they are.
As far as the past live subpersonalities, I'd love to hear a little bit more about this and how these can become part of a person's subpersonality, and maybe some examples of how you've reintegrated these?
Well, it's a great question because it's a very important question often in people's healing. But the example I usually use, if I were to die today and I had subpersonalities created out of trauma who had not been resolved and were still frightened or terrified or still angry, when my body died and I left, the soul left and was returning to the light, these subpersonalities who are unresolved, as Jared said, they continue to have free choice. And often they will, as the soul's going into the light, these subpersonalities will refuse to go because they know the light is going to bring up their trauma. It's going to have them remember the pain or the hurt or the fear. Jared said because they have free choice, the soul will respect that. And it will create, in a sense, a pocket where these subpersonalities can be placed in this pocket and kept from the light because that's their choice. And then when the soul reincarnates and it's moving into this dense reality, into the human body, Jared said that pocket opens back up as it approaches this physical reality in which these past life subpersonalities were created in this kind of reality. The pocket will open back up. And these subpersonalities from past life will, in a sense, be within the field of this conscious person. And if certain things happen in the client's life that similar or the same as was experienced by a past life subpersonality, that can trigger that subpersonality to come forward now into the present. So again, it's one of those things where a person, something happens and they react in a rage and they don't understand why. They may have 4 or 5 subpersonalities who carry that same kind of energy. And now all these energies are coalescing together and the client feels all of that come together. So you've got present life subpersonalities, past life subpersonalities carrying the same issue and reacting to an event. And that can be pretty powerful.
Yeah. Now, one of the most disturbing parts of what is being done by some high-level groups such as 3-letter agencies, black project groups, especially the older projects like we hear in MK Ultra, where they were intentionally splitting people's personalities and using this for nefarious purposes such as assassins, sex pots, different type of CIA or black operations that unfortunately folks were being used and their personalities were being split up using very nefarious methods such as what we know as satanic ritual abuse. Now, have you ever worked with anybody that may have been a victim of some of these practices?
Yes. I've worked with a couple of people who were subjected to MK Ultra and as children. You know, I really do not know the extent, to what extent these things were done to adults, but also to children. I don't know the extent of these experiments. I would consider them not only dark, but evil. And it pains me to think about our government having carried out and maybe still involved with what are called black ops. This is very dark stuff to control other human beings in this way. And one of those is the one you're pointing out, is to inflict intentional trauma in order to create a dissociative personality. Now, I don't know the extent, like you hear about the kind of assassin, I forget what they call them, but
super soldiers.
I don't know the extent of it.
Yeah. Assassins
Manchurian
or super soldiers. Yeah. Manchurian candidates. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know the extent to what that this has happened or is happening. It concerns me a great deal that I don't know all of what they are into.
Now, as far as the instances that you've worked with, what extent were the people affected by subpersonalities, and did it go beyond human spirits or human subpersonalities? Did it go to what you would consider non-human entities with some of these MK Ultra cases?
You mean creating those entities?
Yes.
Or I guess the first thing I would say is, not only did I become aware of the government's involvement in these kind of activities, I did work also with a number of cult victims, whether you want to call it satanic or devil worship, whatever you want to call it. It was very dark energy they were involved in. And the cult activities, practices, rituals were also designed to create, many of them were designed to create, again, dissociative personalities. It made me wonder after a number of years of seeing this, it made me wonder whether there were people involved in the government who learned about these things, did these things, and in a sense went out on their own and continued to practice these things on their own with groups of people. It's almost as if this knowledge of using drugs and trauma to dissociate personalities, it's almost like that became knowledgeable among a number of people. And it spread. I wonder if it spread. It just is disturbing kinds of stuff.
And what would you say is the largest number of subpersonalities that you found in one single subject?
Well, in talking about one of these subjects right now that we've been talking about, there were thousands.
Oh, wow.
It's almost as though what they went through triggered a mechanism that was almost operating automatically. So that the splitting was almost not continuous like every minute, but in their life, that splitting became an ongoing thing. So it's that protective mechanism, in a sense, was turned on its head and just ran rampant. That is, again, one of the kind of consequences.
Now, I remember you were telling us last time you were on about some sort of gatekeeping entity that prevented you from going any further with a certain client. Could you remind us a little bit about what happened in that incident?
Well, this is before I met Jared. And this woman had been diagnosed officially as multiple personality, now called DID, dissociative identity disorder. And I was working with her in what my therapy at that time was ego states, subpersonalities. That's what I was dealing with, parts of the client. And she was a cult victim. And I was working in my office. I was communicating to one of the split off personalities. And I think at that time, the one I was talking about was called the Daughter of Darkness. So that was a part of my client created during occult ritual. When I was communicating to her in my office now, she came forward. I was asking her about what happened to her. What was her experience? What did she go through? And as she began to share with me what happened, all of a sudden, this other entity broke in. Her face changed, her voice changed, her demeanor, the way she was sitting, it all changed. And this entity that was looking at me, as I said, it put the hairs on the back of my head up. I didn't know what this was. This being told me that we would go no further, no more questions. And it was blocking that subpersonality from coming forward with me again. I didn't know what to do, but it's the first time I truly suspected that this entity was not part of my client. I didn't rule out that it could be, but I just felt I wasn't talking to my client.
And this is
that would be sure.
But this is one of the things that ultimately led you to become curious about what was happening with Jared and what he was telling you, right?
Absolutely. I went to the library after that, and I wanted to I'm thinking this lady might be possessed. So I went to the library trying to find everything I could on the psychology and possession and treatment, exorcism. And then in the library, I find all this information and material about all kinds of psychic, paranormal, spiritual events. And so it was opening my eyes. It didn't answer my questions about who this was, but it opened me up to all of these phenomena that were being reported.
You never revisited that case after you had more insight into what was going on, did you?
I did not. What happened was that this client, in one of my sessions afterwards, this was after that happened, let me know that my family was being observed, that they knew where my wife was, where my kids were on a particular day, and this client told me that information.
Oh, wow.
And basically, they had been observing my home and over several days.
Wow.
When I found that out, I told my client I had to terminate the therapy. I could not risk this with my family.
Yeah.
So it didn't. That's where it was left.
Oh yeah, I can't blame you for that one. Man, that is scary. Well, let's spend the last few minutes we have on this. Do you think that our modern medical and academia, medical professionals that we have in our modern times will ever take any of what your research and take any of this seriously? Do you have any hopes that this could eventually be considered by our mainstream science and academia?
Well, Chris, you're opening up a topic. I retired 4 years ago. This is the topic that has probably taken a lot of my time and attention. I would say that the scientific world and the medical world being part of that is resisting tremendous resistance to these realities. And I look at this as the paradigm that runs our society and our culture and has for a few hundred years now. However, I believe we are coming to the point where there is enough information, there is enough data, there are enough eyewitness and self-reporting people who have experienced these things that these realities, in my mind, are irrefutable. This is where I would look at the scientific world, the medical world included, the psychiatric world included, is what we might call willful ignorance, meaning there is enough data to say, hey, something is going on here. And unless we recognize other dimensions, we cannot explain these things otherwise. And until we acknowledge that there are other dimensions of consciousness and being and reality, we are not going to be able to move forward in the way we need to understand who we are and what we're capable of. I tend to look at this as inevitable. I better rephrase that. I don't know if we are going to make that transformation, that transition, because it will change the consciousness of our culture. It's a whole different world to be thinking this way. I don't feel there's any guarantee we're going to make that transition into that level of consciousness. I hope we do. I certainly believe we can.
Well, what do you think about the notion that most likely the biggest reason we haven't already crossed that bridge is because there's free energy implications behind that understanding of different dimensions and different realms and the energy that could surround us at all times. And of course, they don't want us to have our hands on free energy because we wouldn't have to rely on daddy government and those in control to provide everything for us. We would be able to do a lot of that for ourselves, and that might be one of the biggest reasons why that's not being explored.
Chris, I think that is one, but I think there are many in our culture who want to protect the status quo
Yes.
because so much is at stake for so many people. It's the way we live. This is our world. And what we're talking about, this change in consciousness, will change not only the issue about energy, it will change the structure of institutions or lead to the creation of new institutions. It will change how we see ourselves and how we see our reality. These beings that exist, and again, I'll call them off-planet beings. The question in my mind is, are we as a society willing to form a communication with these beings that will be transparent, public, and carry on a communication with them? And I believe that there can be those conditions to allow that to happen. And once we do that, once people understand there are other levels of consciousness and being, we are going to transcend our ego psychology. We are so focused in the ego kind of consciousness. That's why I say these different levels within ourselves that are different levels of consciousness. We can't even begin to deal with that. So I see this as a big, big issue, and we're in it.
Yeah. Well, we're definitely living in very interesting times. I am very hopeful because of the amount of people who are becoming more curious about these things and seemingly aware.
Yeah.
So that's very encouraging. And Dr. Zinser, thank you so much. This was fantastic. I would love to do it again in the future for sure. Before you go, let the audience know about your website and anything else you have out there that they can access.
Well, my website is at www.soulcenteredhealing.net. And I have a new website being built right now, so you may find yourselves in between. The old website is still up, and hopefully the new one is going to be a little better organized, a little everything in order. Like I said, I do not I retired from clinical practice, so I do not see clients any longer. I have trained a number of individuals. Their names and contact info will be on the new website. Meanwhile, I am trying to do some writing on the paradigm shift itself, and I'm preparing the materials that I've put together over these 35 years. So hopefully they'll be passed on in a way that's understandable. So I'm trying to organize all of that.
Excellent. Dr. Zinser, thank you so much. We'll definitely do this again. And until next time, everyone, have an excellent evening. We'll talk again tomorrow. We'll see you then.